The sun, a molten orb of indifferent fire, beat down on the baked earth of the Cache Creek Ranch. Dust, fine as powdered bone, coated everything. The weathered shingles of the bunkhouse, the tired flanks of the horses, and the sweat-slicked brows of the ranch hands. Jedediah Stone, or Jed as he preferred, rode into this simmering tableau on a mare whose ribs stood out like a washboard. His own frame was lean, etched with the lines of countless sunrises and hard miles, his eyes the color of faded denim, holding a wisdom that belied his outwardly rough appearance. He pulled his horse to a halt near the main ranch house, a sturdy, if unadorned, structure that spoke of generations of toil. The young men lounging near the water trough ceased their chatter, their eyes, sharp and appraising, fixing on the newcomer. They were a rough-and-tumble lot, their laughter loud, their swagger pronounced. Jed could feel their scrutiny like a physical weight, a familiar sensation that had followed him across more territories than he cared to count. A burly man, with a sun-bleached mustache, who seemed to be the unofficial leader, spat a stream of brown tobacco juice near Jed's boots. "Well now," he drawled, his voice laced with a challenging curiosity. "Ain't seen you round these parts before, stranger. Name's Clem, and these here are some of the finest hands this side of the Pecos." He gestured with a thumb towards the other cowboys, who offered nods that ranged from indifferent to outright suspicious. Jed offered a slow, measured nod in return. Jed Stone, just passing through, looking for a spell of work, heard this ranch was in need of hands. His voice was a low rumble, weathered like his face, carrying a quiet authority that momentarily silenced Clem's bravado. Clem's gaze flickered to Jed's saddle, worn smooth with age, and then to the pistol holstered at his hip. It was an old Colt, its bluing long since faded, replaced by a patina of rust and time. A few of the younger hands snickered. "Work, huh?" Clem drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. "We can always use another pair of hands, long as they can pull their weight. But that old iron you're packing?" He squinted at the Colt. "Can that rusty Colt even fire? Looks like it'd fall apart if you breathed on it too hard." The snickers turned into outright laughter, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed across the dusty yard. Jed felt a flicker of annoyance, a familiar ember of anger he'd learned to keep banked low. He'd faced tougher critics than these green-eared cowboys. "It's seen its share of action," Jed replied evenly, his gaze unwavering. "And it's always been reliable when I needed it." "Reliable, you say?" Another cowboy chimed in, a lanky fellow named Billy, whose smile revealed a missing tooth. "Looks more like a museum piece, Jed. We got modern shooting irons here, see? None of that antique junk." He patted the gleaming Winchester rifle slung across his back. Jed merely shrugged, dismounting his mare with a practiced grace. He led the horse towards the livery stable, the laughter of the ranch hands fading behind him. He knew this routine. The fresh faces, the sizing up, the inevitable tests of will. Cache Creek Ranch was a sizable operation, a sprawling testament to the vision of Martha Sterling, a woman known for her shrewdness and her iron grip on her land. But beneath the surface, Jed sensed a tension, a fragility that the brash confidence of the young cowboys couldn't quite mask. He stabled his mare, a gentle creature named Bess, ensuring she had water and a good measure of oats. As he worked, he overheard snippets of conversation from the bunkhouse. "Old-timer looking for work. That gun, though, bet he can't hit a barn door with it. Probably running from something." Jed ignored them, his focus on the task at hand. He wasn't here to make friends, not at first, anyway. He was here because the dust of the trail had become too familiar, and he needed a place to anchor himself, if only for a while. And Martha Sterling, despite her reputation for sternness, had a certain reputation for fairness, a quality Jed valued above all else. He walked back towards the main house, his gait steady. He saw a young woman emerge from the house, her hair the color of spun gold, tied back with a simple ribbon. She was slender, but there was a resilience in her posture, a spark in her bright blue eyes that reminded him of a wildflower pushing through hardscrabble soil. She carried a basket of laundry, her movements efficient and purposeful. As she passed him, her eyes met his. There was no mockery in them, only a flicker of curiosity, perhaps a touch of weariness. She offered a small, polite nod, and Jed returned it. He caught the faint scent of lavender and sun-dried linen, a fleeting moment of peace in the rough and tumble world of the ranch. He didn't know who she was, but he felt a strange pull, a sense of quiet hope in her presence. The jeers of the ranch hands still echoed in his ears, but they seemed to recede, replaced by the subtle hum of a life he might yet find a place in. Martha Sterling, or Ma, as she was known by those who dared such familiarity, was a force of nature, a woman carved from the very granite of the land she commanded. Her ranch, Cache Creek, was her lifeblood, a sprawling expanse of rolling hills and fertile valleys that had been her husband's dream and her legacy. Now, in her twilight years, she ruled it with a quiet but unyielding authority. Her presence was felt even when she wasn't seen, a silent weight that permeated the very air of the ranch. Jed found himself summoned to her office, a room dominated by a large oak desk littered with ledgers, maps, and a scattering of dried wildflowers. Ma Sterling sat behind it, her back ramrod straight, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun. Her eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, missed nothing. They held the wisdom of years, the sting of loss, and the unyielding will of a pioneer. "Mr. Stone," she began, her voice surprisingly strong, though tinged with the rasp of age, "I understand you're seeking employment." Jed stood before her, his hat in his hands, respectful but not servile. "Yes, ma'am, Jed Stone, looking for steady work." Ma Sterling's gaze swept over him, a silent appraisal that felt more thorough than any physical examination. She noted his calloused hands, the leanness of his build, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. She'd seen men like him before, men who carried their past like a shadow, but who could also move with a quiet competence when the need arose. "The ranch is in a difficult time, Mr. Stone," she said, her voice losing some of its sharpness and taking on a somber tone. "The drought has been severe, our cattle are thin, and the grass is like tinder. On top of that," she paused, her gaze hardening, "there are vultures circling." Jed waited, sensing the unspoken words. He'd learned to read the silences of people, to decipher the unease that lay beneath the surface. "Silas Croft," she continued, the name a bitter pill. "He's a man who deals in shadows and lies. He claims my late husband owed him a considerable sum, a sum I believe to be fabricated, but Croft is persistent. He sends his men, a rough lot, to remind us of our supposed debt. They harass the hands, try to provoke trouble." She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "He wants this land, Mr. Stone, and he'll stop at nothing." Jed nodded slowly. He'd encountered men like Croft before. They preyed on weakness, on desperation. They were the leeches of the West, thriving on the misfortunes of others. "The young men you met," Ma Sterling continued, a hint of disapproval in her voice, "they are strong, but they lack experience. They are easily provoked. Clem particularly thinks he knows it all." She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "They laughed at your firearm. I don't know its history, Mr. Stone, but I value a tool that serves its purpose, especially now." Jed met her gaze. "My Colt has served me well, ma'am. It's old, but it's sound." "Soundness is what we need on Cache Creek right now," she said, a hint of steel returning to her voice. "We need hands who can work, who can keep their heads, and who aren't afraid of a little hard trouble. I'm willing to give you a chance, a trial period. You'll bunk with the men, work the usual hours. If you prove yourself capable, we'll talk about permanent employment." Jed offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't disappoint you." As he left her office, he noticed the young woman from earlier, Lily, as he now knew her name from Ma Sterling's brief mention, tending to a small patch of wilting roses near the porch. She looked up as he approached. her expression one of quiet concern. "Mr. Stone," she asked, her voice soft and melodious, "Ma Sterling hired you?" "Yes, Miss Sterling, she did." Lily's smile was small, but it held a warmth that seemed to push back against the oppressive heat of the day. "That's good. We could use a steady hand, especially with everything." Her gaze flickered towards the distant, hazy outline of the hills, a subtle hint of the troubles that loomed. "I'll do my best," Jed assured her. "I know you will," Lily replied, her blue eyes meeting his with an unexpected depth of understanding. "Ma trusts her judgment, and so do I." Jed felt a stir of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, however tentative. The young cowboys' jeers seemed even more hollow now, their bravado a fragile shield against the real dangers that threatened Cache Creek. He glanced back at the office, at the woman who held the fate of this ranch in her weathered hands. Ma Sterling, a formidable presence, had given him a chance. Now it was up to him to prove he was worth it. And he had a feeling that Lily Sterling, with her quiet strength, would be a vital part of that journey, whether she knew it yet or not. The dust of Cache Creek was settling, and Jed Stone was ready to make his mark. The air in the main barn hung thick with the scent of hay, horses, and the earthy musk of cattle. Tonight, however, it was also alive with the nervous energy of the Cache Creek ranch hands. A barn dance, a rare occasion for levity, was in full swing, the fiddle music a jaunty, almost desperate attempt to lift the spirits. Jed watched from the periphery, his movements economical, his gaze taking in the scene. The young cowboys, emboldened by a few swigs of whiskey, were more boisterous than usual. Clem, as expected, held court, his laughter booming, his arm draped around a young woman who looked decidedly uncomfortable. Jed felt no urge to join the revelry. His skills lay in the saddle, in the quiet observation of the herd, and in the steady hand that could calm a spooked horse or draw a bead with unwavering precision. Dancing was not among his talents. Besides, he was still an outsider, the new man with the rusty Colt. He could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of curiosity and veiled challenge. Billy, the lanky cowboy with the missing tooth, sidled up to him, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. "Come on, old-timer," he slurred, pushing the bottle towards Jed. "Loosen up a bit. Ain't every day we get a chance to forget about the dust and the drought." Jed politely declined. "Thank you, Billy, but I'm not much of a drinker." "And I need my wits about me," Billy scoffed, taking a long swig himself. "Wits about you for what? To shoot a rabbit? That old gun of yours ain't going to help you much if Silas Croft decides to send his boys for a visit." He nudged Jed with his elbow. "Heard he's been asking about Miss Lily again. Ma Sterling ain't going to hold him off forever, you know." Jed's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He hadn't spoken to Lily since their brief exchange, but he'd observed her. She moved with a grace and confidence that belied her youth, a constant presence of quiet strength that seemed to anchor the ranch. The thought of her being threatened by Croft's men was a cold knot in his stomach. "Ma Sterling is a strong woman," Jed said, his voice low and steady, "and I doubt she'll let any man push her around." Clem, overhearing the conversation from his corner, swaggered over, his face flushed. "That's right, Stone. Ma Sterling is tough, but even the toughest can get cornered. And Silas Croft, he's got a way of cornering folks." He sneered, his eyes flicking to Jed's Colt. "Speaking of which, you gonna use that antique to fend off Croft's boys? Might be more effective to just wave it at 'em. Might scare 'em with its age." A ripple of laughter went through the cowboys who had gathered around. Jed's patience, usually as vast as the plains, was beginning to fray. He could see the trap being laid. They wanted him to react, to lose his temper, to prove their initial judgment of him correct. "My gun is my business, Clem," Jed said, his voice dangerously calm. "And so is my ability to defend this ranch, should the need arise." Clem's eyes narrowed. "Oh, you think you're a hero now, do you? The Lone Ranger coming to save the day? You ain't even been here a week, and you're already talking tough." He puffed out his chest. Let me tell you something, Stone. When Croft's boys ride in, it's going to be us, the real hands, who stand between them and Ma Sterling, not some has-been with a rusty toy. Just as the tension threatened to boil over, a commotion erupted near the barn entrance. A group of rough-looking men, their faces hard and their intentions clear, had arrived. They weren't Silas Croft himself, but they bore his mark, the swagger, the arrogance, the thinly veiled menace. They were here to sow discord, to remind the Cache Creek hands of the power Croft wielded. The fiddle music faltered, then stopped. The laughter died. A hush fell over the barn, thick with apprehension. The young cowboys stiffened, their earlier bravado evaporating like dew in the morning sun. Clem, despite his bluster, looked pale. The leader of the newcomers, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, surveyed the scene with a cruel smirk. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice cutting through the silence. "Looks like the Cache Creek hands like to party. Shame their pockets are as empty as their pastures." He spat on the ground near the barn door. "Silas Croft sends his regards, and a reminder that Ma Sterling's time is running out. He says he'll be back in a week to collect what's owed, and if it ain't paid—" He let the threat hang in the air. Jed watched the young cowboys, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. They were outmatched, outgunned, and clearly out of their depth. Clem, for all his boasting, was frozen, his bravado shattered. Then Jed moved. It was a fluid, deliberate motion. He unholstered his Colt. The sound of the hammer being cocked, a sharp metallic click, echoed through the silent barn. The rusty gun, so easily dismissed, was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. He didn't draw a bead on anyone. He simply held it, a silent promise of readiness. His gaze, steady and unwavering, met the eyes of the scarred leader. "You tell Silas Croft," Jed said, his voice resonating with a quiet power that commanded attention, "that Cache Creek is protected, and that if he tries to collect anything, he'll have to deal with us first. And that includes me." The scarred man blinked, taken aback by the unexpected defiance. He'd expected fear, perhaps a few foolhardy attempts at aggression from the young cowboys. But this was different. This quiet man, with his worn-out gun, radiated a calm resolve that was far more unsettling than any wild shot. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was a coiled spring, ready to snap. Jed held the man's gaze, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he was more than prepared for one. He could see the surprise, then a flicker of grudging respect in the eyes of some of the younger hands. Even Clem seemed to have been momentarily stunned into silence. Finally, the scarred leader let out a short, humorless laugh. "You got guts, old man," he spat, his bravado returning, though it was now tinged with a newfound wariness. "But Croft ain't scared of a rusty Colt. We'll be back, and next time we won't be so polite." With a final glare, the men turned and mounted their horses, disappearing into the moonlit night. The silence they left behind was deafening. The barn dance was over, its gaiety shattered. But in its place, something else had begun to stir. A grudging acknowledgement, a flicker of hope, and the dawning realization that Jed Stone, the man with the rusty Colt, was far more than he appeared. The departure of Silas Croft's men left an uneasy quiet in its wake. The fiddle lay silent, the dancers dispersed, and the lingering scent of cheap whiskey and fear hung heavy in the air. Jed, his Colt holstered once more, watched as the young ranch hands exchanged nervous glances, their bravado replaced by a palpable apprehension. Clem, his face now devoid of its earlier arrogance, approached Jed, his boots scuffing the dusty floor. "That was unexpected, Stone," Clem admitted, his voice considerably subdued. "Didn't think you had it in you." Jed simply nodded. He didn't need their apologies or their grudging admiration. He just needed them to understand that the real danger wasn't a rusty gun, but a lack of readiness. "Croft's men will be back," Jed stated, his gaze steady. "And they won't be alone next time. We need to be prepared, not just with guns, but with a plan." Billy, who had been lurking nearby, chimed in. A plan? What kind of plan? We ain't got enough hands to fight off a dozen of Croft's thugs, let alone what he'll send next. We don't have to fight them head on, Jed replied, his mind already working through the possibilities. We have the advantage of knowing this land. We can use it. And we need to make sure Ma Sterling is informed. She needs to know what's happening, and she needs to be safe. The mention of Ma Sterling brought a fresh wave of concern. While she was a formidable woman, the prospect of Silas Croft's full force descending upon Cache Creek was a chilling thought. Lily, who had remained at the edge of the barn, watching the exchange with quiet intensity, stepped forward. "Mr. Stone is right," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the men's uncertainty. "Ma has been anticipating this, but I don't think she realized how soon it might happen. We need to tell her, and we need to be organized." Her words carried a quiet authority that surprised Jed. She wasn't just a rancher's granddaughter. She was an integral part of Cache Creek, her spirit as resilient as the land itself. The following morning, Jed, accompanied by Lily, presented themselves to Ma Sterling. The matriarch listened intently as they recounted the events of the previous night, her face a mask of grim determination. Her blue eyes, usually so sharp, held a flicker of concern as she looked at Lily, but then hardened as she turned her attention back to Jed. "Silas Croft," she murmured, her voice like stones grinding together. "He's a rat, always sniffing for weakness. This drought has made him bold, thinking we're ripe for the plucking." She tapped a long finger on her desk. "He wants this land, and he'll use any means necessary. Lily, you've always had a good head on your shoulders. What do you think we should do?" Lily, standing beside Jed, didn't hesitate. "Mr. Stone believes we need a plan, Ma. He says we can use the land to our advantage. He also thinks we need to secure the herd. If Croft can cripple our cattle, he cripples us." Ma Sterling nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "The herd is our lifeblood. Losing them would be devastating. And Mr. Stone's assessment of Croft is accurate. He's a man who thrives on calculated cruelty." She looked at Jed. "Mr. Stone, you seem to have a clear head for these matters. What do you propose?" Jed outlined his thoughts. "We can't outgun Croft's men if they decide to make a direct assault. But we can make it difficult for them. We can spread out the herd, move them to the more inaccessible pastures. We can set up a few surprises for anyone who gets too curious about our movements, and we need to make sure our communication lines are secure. If Croft sends his men to cut us off, we need to know." He spoke with a quiet confidence that impressed even Ma Sterling. His words were practical, grounded in the realities of ranch life and the dangers of their current situation. He wasn't a general planning a war, but a man who understood how to survive in a harsh environment. "Surprises?" Clem, who had been summoned to the meeting, asked, a hint of his old swagger returning, but now tinged with genuine curiosity. "Nothing that will harm anyone unnecessarily," Jed clarified. "Just deterrence. A few strategically placed tripwires, some diversions. Enough to make them think twice about what they're getting into." Ma Sterling listened, her gaze fixed on Jed. He wasn't a man of grand pronouncements, but of quiet competence. He spoke of defense, not aggression, of protecting what was theirs, not of seeking revenge. "I like your thinking, Mr. Stone," she said finally. "You understand this land, and you understand the nature of men like Croft. Very well. You will take the lead on this. Organize the hands. Make them see the sense in it. Clem, you will assist Mr. Stone, and no more laughing at his gun. It seems it might be the only reliable thing we have on this ranch right now." Clem flushed, but nodded sheepishly. Lily offered Jed a small, encouraging smile. The whispers in the wind, the harbinger of danger, were growing louder. But now, for the first time, Jed felt a sense of purpose, a shared resolve that extended beyond his own survival. Cache Creek was no longer just a temporary stop. It was a place worth fighting for, and he, the quiet cowboy with the rusty Colt, was ready to do his part. The days that followed were a relentless cycle of work under a sky that offered no relief. The sun, a blazing eye in a cloudless expanse, seemed to mock their efforts. The drought had sunk its claws deep into Cache Creek, turning once lush pastures into brittle plains of straw. The cattle, gaunt and weary, huddled together in the meager shade, their ribs stark beneath their hides. Every drop of water was a precious commodity, guarded with a fierce possessiveness. Jed, working alongside the other ranch hands, felt the familiar ache of exertion, but also a growing sense of urgency. The preparations he'd initiated were underway, but they were a race against time. He and Clem, despite their initial animosity, had found a grudging respect for each other. Clem, it turned out, was a capable hand when he wasn't indulging in his own bravado, and Jed's quiet leadership was beginning to earn him the respect of the others. "Heard Croft's men were seen near the South Ridge yesterday," Clem reported, wiping sweat from his brow as they checked a newly rigged tripwire camouflaged with brush. "Just scouting, probably, but they're getting bolder." Jed nodded, his gaze scanning the horizon. "They're testing us, trying to see how we react. The more we show them we're organized, the more they'll hesitate." He paused, looking at the weary cattle. "We need to move the main herd to the northern pastures. There's a spring there that, while low, is still running. It's our best chance to keep them hydrated." Moving the herd was a monumental task. It meant days of hard riding, of coaxing reluctant animals, of constantly watching for threats, both natural and man-made. The young cowboys, initially resentful of Jed's authority, now followed his lead with a grim determination. They saw the logic in his strategies, the foresight in his preparations. They saw how he handled his old Colt, not as a showpiece, but as a tool that was always ready, always reliable. One afternoon, while scouting ahead of the herd, Jed found himself near the remnants of an old, abandoned homestead. The wind whistled through the broken window panes, carrying a mournful sigh. He dismounted, a sense of melancholy washing over him. He'd seen too many dreams turn to dust in this unforgiving land. As he stood there, he noticed a glint of metal half buried in the dry earth. Curious, he knelt and dug it out. It was a small, tarnished locket, intricately engraved. He opened it to reveal two faded daguerreotypes, a man and a woman, their faces smiling out from a bygone era. A pang of loneliness, sharp and unexpected, shot through him. He closed the locket and slipped it into his pocket, a silent reminder of the lives that had once thrived here, and the resilience it took to build them. Back at the ranch, Lily was working tirelessly, helping Ma Sterling manage the dwindling supplies and tending to the weaker calves. Jed often found himself observing her, struck by her unwavering spirit. She was the heart of Cache Creek, a constant beacon of hope. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the sky, Jed found Lily sitting on the porch, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. "It's hard, isn't it?" Jed said, his voice a low rumble as he sat down beside her. Lily looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "It is. Sometimes I feel like the land is just giving up. And when I see the cattle suffering, my heart aches." "The land is tough, Miss Sterling," Jed said, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse. "It endures, and so will we. It takes time, and it takes patience, and sometimes," he added, a hint of a smile touching his lips, "it takes a little bit of stubbornness." Lily returned his smile, a genuine warmth radiating from her. "Ma says you have that in spades, Mr. Stone. Stubbornness, I mean." Jed chuckled softly. "I suppose I do. It's kept me alive this long." He didn't speak of his past, and she didn't pry. They sat in comfortable silence, two souls finding solace in the shared burden of their present. The drought was a formidable enemy, but Jed knew that the true test would come when Silas Croft decided to make his move. The preparations were in place, but the outcome remained uncertain. The resilience of Cache Creek was being tested, and Jed, the quiet cowboy, was ready to face whatever the unforgiving winds of the West would bring. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to Ma Sterling, but to Lily, to the land, and to the fragile hope that flickered in the heart of Cache Creek. The air grew heavy, not just with the oppressive heat of the drought, but with a palpable sense of dread. Croft's men had been sighted more frequently now, bolder in their patrols, their presence a constant menacing shadow. Jed had reinforced the tripwires and set up a few more surprises along the likely approaches to the ranch. Simple diversions designed to slow and disorient, not injure. He knew that a direct confrontation was inevitable, and he wanted to be prepared. One sweltering afternoon, as Jed and Clem were checking on a section of fence line near the western boundary, they heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Not the hurried pace of a scout, but the steady, determined gait of a group on a mission. "There they are," Clem breathed, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung across his back. "Looks like more than a few this time." Jed's eyes narrowed. They could see 5 riders now, silhouetted against the shimmering heat haze. They wore the rough, defiant attire of Croft's hired muscle. "All right," Jed said, his voice calm and steady. "Remember the plan? We don't engage directly unless we have to. We make them think twice about what they're doing." He signaled to Clem, and they moved swiftly, melting into the sparse scrubland. They kept the riders in sight, their movements silent and practiced. The riders, confident in their numbers, pushed forward, their path leading directly towards one of Jed's camouflaged tripwires. As the lead rider's horse hit the subtle trigger, a series of small hollow gourds, filled with pebbles and tied to strings, began to rattle and shake erratically in the bushes. It wasn't loud, but it was unexpected, and the horses, already on edge from the heat and their riders' tension, shied violently. "What the devil was that?" one of the riders yelled, pulling his horse up short. "Just the wind," another scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. Before they could regain their composure, a second, more subtle device activated. A carefully placed, almost invisible noose, designed to snag a stirrup, tugged sharply, causing a horse to stumble and nearly unseat its rider. The man cursed loudly, struggling to regain control. "That ain't the wind," Clem whispered, a grin spreading across his face. "That's Jed's work." Jed remained silent, observing. He saw the confusion and frustration spreading among Croft's men. They were expecting a straightforward intimidation, a show of force. Instead, they were being met with a series of minor, perplexing annoyances that frayed their nerves and slowed their progress. The lead rider, the one with the scarred eyebrow from the barn dance, dismounted. He seemed to be the leader. He examined the ground, his expression growing suspicious. "Someone's been messing around here," he growled. "This ain't natural." He looked around, his eyes scanning the sparse cover. Jed and Clem remained hidden, their breathing slow and steady. They could see the men growing more agitated, their confidence wavering. "Let's just ride on," another man urged. "The boss wants us to check on the cattle situation. This is a waste of time." The scarred leader hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the landscape. He knew Cache Creek was under pressure. He expected the ranchers to be wary, perhaps even fearful. But this was different. It felt like the land itself was pushing back. Jed decided it was time for a subtle nudge. He picked up a small stone, and with a flick of his wrist sent it skittering across the dry ground, just a few yards from where the scarred leader stood. It was a tiny sound, but in the tense silence, it was enough. The leader spun around, his hand going to his pistol. "Who's there?" he shouted. "Show yourself!" Jed didn't move. He knew the power of the unknown. The threat of an unseen enemy was often more potent than a visible one. Clem, however, couldn't resist a small, mischievous act. From his concealed position, he whistled a jaunty, off-key tune. It was an act of defiance, a playful jab at the intruders. The scarred leader heard it, his face contorting with anger. "There's more than one of them," he roared. "Spread out, find them!" His men, now thoroughly unnerved, began to move erratically, their horses stumbling on the uneven ground, their attention divided. Jed saw his opportunity. "Now's our chance," Jed said to Clem. "Let's head back to the ranch. Ma Sterling needs to know they're probing our defenses." They withdrew, moving with practiced ease, leaving Croft's men to deal with their own paranoia and the subtle traps Jed had laid. As they rode back, Jed could hear the angry shouts and frustrated curses of the intruders echoing behind them. When they reported to Ma Sterling, she listened intently, her expression one of grim satisfaction. "So Croft is testing the waters," she said, her voice firm. "He wants to see if we're ready to bend. He underestimates the spirit of this place and the people who stand for it." She looked at Jed, her blue eyes holding a newfound respect. "Your surprises seem to be working, Mr. Stone. You've made them hesitate, and that in itself is a victory." Jed nodded, but his gaze was distant. He knew this was just the beginning. Croft would not be deterred by a few rattling gourds and a snagged stirrup. This was merely the first test, a prelude to a larger conflict. But for now, Cache Creek had stood its ground, and the quiet cowboy with the rusty Colt had proven that his methods, though unconventional, were effective. The drought still gripped the land, but a different kind of strength was beginning to take root on Cache Creek Ranch. The days following the encounter with Croft's scouts were filled with a heightened sense of vigilance. The young ranch hands, their initial skepticism about Jed's methods replaced by a grudging admiration, worked with a newfound seriousness. They patrolled the perimeter with more care, kept a closer eye on the cattle, and learned to anticipate the subtle signs of danger. The drought, however, remained an ever-present adversary, its grip tightening with each passing day. The waterhole was shrinking, and the cattle were growing thinner, their lowing a constant mournful sound. Lily Sterling, though not a field hand in the traditional sense, was an indispensable part of Cache Creek's defense. She managed the ranch's meager supplies with an almost uncanny efficiency, ensuring that every drop of water and every scrap of food was stretched to its limit. She spent hours with Ma Sterling, poring over ledgers and maps, her bright blue eyes betraying the immense weight of responsibility she carried. Jed often found himself observing her, struck by her quiet resilience. While the men were out dealing with the physical threats, Lily was fighting her own battle, a battle of logistics and morale. She was the anchor that kept the heart of the ranch from faltering. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows, Jed found Lily sitting alone on the porch, her gaze fixed on the parched fields. Her usual bright demeanor was tinged with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "Everything all right, Miss Sterling?" Jed asked, his voice soft as he approached. Lily started slightly, then offered a faint smile. "Just thinking, Mr. Stone, about the herd. They look so miserable." Her voice trembled slightly. "And about Ma. She's so strong, but I can see the worry in her eyes. This drought and Croft, it's a lot for her to bear." Jed sat down beside her, his presence a silent comfort. "She's a remarkable woman," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant, hazy outline of the mountains. "She's built this ranch with her own hands, and she won't let it fall now. But what if she can't stop Croft?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "He's ruthless. He doesn't care about the land or the cattle or any of us. He just wants what he thinks is his." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a stark contrast to the dust that coated her skin. "Sometimes I feel so helpless, Mr. Stone. I can't ride out and fight like the men. I can't even make it rain." Jed understood her despair. The feeling of helplessness was a familiar companion in the harsh West. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tarnished locket he had found at the abandoned homestead. He opened it, revealing the faded images of a smiling couple. "I found this at an old place out west," he said, his voice low. "Someone's dream, someone's life. It's gone now, weathered away by time and hardship. But for a while, it was everything to them. They must have faced their own struggles, their own droughts, their own threats." He closed the locket, the metal cool against his palm. "This land, it takes everything, but it also gives back. It teaches you to be strong, to endure. And sometimes, he looked at Lily, his gaze steady, it teaches you that your greatest strength isn't in fighting, but in holding on, in keeping the heart of the ranch beating, even when everything else seems to be failing. Lily looked at the locket, then back at Jed. She saw not just a cowboy, but a man who understood the quiet battles, the internal struggles that often went unseen. She felt a flicker of something stir within her, not hope perhaps, but a renewed sense of resolve. "Ma always says that resilience is in our blood," Lily said softly. She learned it from her mother, and her mother before her. I don't want to let them down." "You won't," Jed assured her. "You're the heart of this place, Miss Sterling, and a strong heart can weather any storm. We'll all do our part. The men will guard the fences. I'll keep an eye on Croft's movements. And you keep this place running. You keep Ma Sterling strong. That's your fight, and it's just as important as any other." He stood up, the familiar ache in his bones, a testament to his own resilience. "The cattle need tending. I'll take a look at them before dark." Lily watched him go, a newfound strength settling within her. She knew Jed was right. Her battle was on the ranch, in the everyday tasks that kept Cache Creek alive. She couldn't make it rain, but she could ensure that when the rain finally came, Cache Creek would still be standing to receive it. The weight on her shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it felt a little less crushing, a little more manageable. Jed's quiet understanding, his unwavering calm, had given her a measure of peace and a renewed determination to face the challenges ahead, not just for herself, but for the legacy of Cache Creek. The drought continued its relentless assault on Cache Creek. The once vibrant landscape was now a testament to nature's harsh indifference. The cattle grew gaunter, their movements sluggish, their eyes reflecting the desperate thirst that plagued them. The ranch hands worked with a grim efficiency, their faces etched with worry, but their efforts were a constant battle against an invisible enemy. Jed, ever vigilant, felt the tension mounting. Croft's men had been less active in their direct probing, but this stillness was more unnerving than their previous incursions. It felt like a predator lying in wait, gathering its strength for a decisive strike. He spent his days patrolling the perimeter, observing the subtle shifts in the wind, the nervous flick of a rabbit's ear, any sign that might betray the enemy's approach. One evening, as Jed rode back towards the ranch house, he saw Ma Sterling and Lily standing by the corral, their faces turned towards the north. A plume of dust, faint but distinct, was rising against the deepening twilight. "What is it?" Jed asked, reining in his horse. Ma Sterling's voice was tight with a controlled anxiety. "It's Croft's men. They're coming in force. Looks like more than a dozen. They're heading straight for the north pastures. They know about the spring. They mean to cut off our last source of water." Jed's jaw tightened. This was it, the move he had been anticipating. Cutting off their water supply would cripple Cache Creek, forcing Ma Sterling to surrender the land. "We can't let them get to the spring," Jed said, his voice low and urgent. "The herd is there. If they get to them, it's over." Clem and Billy, who had been nearby, hurried over. Their faces, usually filled with a mixture of bravado and apprehension, were now grim. "There's too many of them, Jed," Clem said, his voice devoid of its usual swagger. "We'll be outgunned, outnumbered." "We don't have to fight them head-on," Jed countered, his mind racing. "We can slow them down. We can harass them, make them think this is more trouble than it's worth." He looked at Lily, who stood by her grandmother's side, her expression resolute. "Miss Sterling, is there any way to divert the cattle from the spring, or at least herd them towards the more sheltered areas near the ranch house?" Lily nodded, her eyes meeting Jed's with a determined spark. "Yes, I know a few hidden trails. We can try to funnel them towards the south ridge. It's rougher terrain, but it offers more cover. I can lead them with a few hands." "No," Jed said firmly. "It's too dangerous. You stay here, with your grandmother." "But Mr. Stone?" Lily began, protest in her voice. "Miss Sterling," Jed interrupted, his tone unwavering. "Your place is here. You are the heart of this ranch. You keep Ma Sterling safe, and you keep the ranch house secure. The cattle can be moved by experienced hands. I'll go with Clem and Billy and a few others. We'll try to delay them, buy you time." Ma Sterling placed a hand on Lily's arm, her gaze steady. "Jed is right, Lily. Your strength is here. We will manage. Go, Mr. Stone. Do what you can. And do not throw your life away needlessly. We still need you." Jed nodded, a sense of grim determination settling over him. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he also knew that giving up was not an option. He gathered the handful of men who were willing to stand with him, Clem, Billy, and 3 other seasoned ranch hands. They grabbed their rifles, checked their ammunition, and mounted their horses. Jed holstered his Colt, its familiar weight a small comfort. As they rode out into the darkening landscape, Jed looked back at the ranch house, at the 2 women standing silhouetted against the fading light. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a deep-seated resolve to ensure they remained safe. He was an outsider, a man with a shadowed past, but in that moment Cache Creek felt like his own. They rode hard, their horses kicking up dust, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. They knew they couldn't stop Croft's men, not entirely. But they could make them pay for every inch of ground they gained. They could be the thorns in Croft's side, the persistent gnats that made his victory taste bitter. Jed's mind was already working, strategizing, planning their maneuvers. He wasn't looking for glory, only for a way to protect the fragile hope that had begun to bloom on Cache Creek. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the drought. Jed and his small contingent of ranch hands, Clem, Billy, and 3 others, rode hard, their horses churning up the dry earth. The dust plume they'd seen from the ranch house was now a swirling, ominous cloud on the horizon, growing larger with terrifying speed. Croft's men were close. "We need to slow 'em down," Jed rasped, his voice hoarse from the dust and the urgency. "We can't take them head-on, but we can make them earn every step towards that spring." Clem, his face set in a grim mask, nodded. "Jed's right, we gotta make 'em think twice, make 'em waste time and ammo." They veered off the main trail, heading towards a narrow canyon that offered a natural choke point. Jed had scouted it earlier, recognizing its strategic value. It was a place where a small force could make a disproportionate impact, at least for a short while. "Billy, you and Hank take the high ground on the left," Jed directed, pointing to a rocky outcrop. "Keep your shots aimed to spook their horses, not kill. We want to slow them, not start a massacre just yet. Hank, remember what I showed you about flanking." Billy, his youthful eagerness now tempered with a serious resolve, nodded. "Yes, sir, Jed. Make 'em think they're surrounded." "Clem, you and the other 2, Jed continued. "You'll be with me. We'll create a diversion further down, a few well-placed shots, then we fall back. Make them chase us, split their attention." Jed checked his Colt, the familiar weight a steadying presence. It wasn't the fastest gun, nor the most powerful, but he knew its capabilities, and more importantly, he knew his own. He wasn't a gunslinger seeking glory. He was a man trying to buy time to protect what mattered. As they reached the mouth of the canyon, the sound of approaching riders grew louder, a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very earth. Jed could see them now, a solid mass of men on horseback, their faces grim and determined. They were led by the scarred man from the barn dance, his expression a mask of cold fury. "All right, boys," Jed said, his voice low but steady. "Remember the plan. Make 'em regret coming here." He signaled to Billy and Hank, who scrambled up the rocky slope, disappearing into the sparse brush. Then Jed, Clem, and the remaining 3 men took their positions. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence before the storm. The lead riders entered the canyon, their numbers immediately creating a bottleneck. Jed waited until the bulk of the group had passed their initial position, then he raised his rifle. He took a deep breath, steadied his aim, and fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, a sharp crack that broke the tense silence. It was aimed true, striking the ground just in front of the lead rider's horse. The animal shied violently, rearing up and throwing its rider. Chaos erupted. Other horses, startled by the shot and the sudden commotion, began to falter. "Now!" Jed roared, firing again. Clem and the others joined in, their shots ringing out. They focused on the horses, on creating as much disruption as possible. From above, Billy and Hank opened fire, their bullets striking near the riders, further unnerving their mounts. The scarred leader, though momentarily thrown, quickly regained his composure. He dismounted, his face a mask of rage. "Hold your positions!" he bellowed. "Don't let them scatter us!" His men, though shaken, began to dismount and return fire, their shots wild and inaccurate in the confusion. Jed and his men didn't stay to exchange fire. They fired a few more volleys, creating a cacophony of noise and disruption, then wheeled their horses and galloped deeper into the canyon, drawing the fire of Croft's men. "They're running!" one of Croft's men yelled. "After them!" The scarred leader, however, saw the trap. He'd seen the coordinated effort, the deliberate targeting of the horses. "Hold!" he commanded. "Don't chase them. They're trying to lure us deeper. We go for the spring." But the damage was done. Several horses were injured, and the men were disoriented. Their advance had been significantly delayed and their confidence shaken. Jed and his men, having drawn the enemy's attention, now doubled back, using the terrain to their advantage, aiming to harass the flanks and rear of Croft's advancing column. Jed fired another shot, hitting the wheel of a supply wagon that Croft's men had brought along. It careened off, spilling its contents onto the dusty ground. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As he rode, he could hear the frustrated shouts of Croft's men, their initial confidence replaced by a grudging respect for their unseen adversaries. He glanced back. The dust cloud was still there, but it seemed less menacing now. They had bought time, precious, vital time. He knew this was only the beginning, that Croft would not be deterred easily. But as he spurred his horse onward, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over him. The rusty Colt had fired, and it had made its mark. The fight for Cache Creek had truly begun. The skirmish in the canyon had bought them time. But the drought's relentless grip tightened its hold on Cache Creek. The northern spring, though still yielding a trickle, was rapidly diminishing. The cattle, driven towards the southern ridge as Lily had planned, were now clustered in a desperate, dusty huddle, their lowing a constant testament to their suffering. Silas Croft, however, had not been deterred. He was a man of avarice, and he knew that control of the water meant control of the ranch. Jed, Clem, and Billy, along with the other ranch hands, had regrouped at the ranch house. Their initial success in delaying Croft's men had come at a cost. One of the hands, a young man named Tom, had taken a non-fatal but debilitating wound to his leg. His pain was a stark reminder of the stakes. Ma Sterling, her face a mask of grim determination, addressed the small group gathered in her office. "Croft's men have made it clear. They intend to control the spring. They believe that by cutting off our water, they can force me to sign over the ranch. They've surrounded the spring, making it impossible for us to get any water to the herd." Lily, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but her voice steady, added, "The cattle are suffering terribly, Ma. If we don't get them water soon, we'll lose a significant portion of the herd." Jed stepped forward, his gaze meeting Ma Sterling's. "Mom, we can't let them win this. We need to break through Croft's blockade at the spring. It won't be easy, but we have the element of surprise, and we know the terrain better than they do." Clem chimed in, his earlier bravado replaced by a steely resolve. "Jed's right. We can't just sit here and watch our herd die. We'll fight for that water." Billy nodded vigorously. "I'm with Jed. We'll make 'em regret trying to starve us out." Ma Sterling looked at Jed, her piercing blue eyes assessing his quiet confidence. "Mr. Stone, you've proven yourself to be resourceful and brave. I trust your judgment. But we cannot afford to lose any more men. What is your plan?" Jed outlined his strategy. "We'll approach from the west, using the cover of the shadowed canyons. We'll split into two groups. One, led by Clem, will create a diversion near the northern approach to the spring, drawing Croft's men's attention. The other, led by myself, will attempt to slip in from the west and secure the spring itself. If we can get water flowing again, even for a short while, it will give us the leverage we need." He looked at his worn Colt. "This old gun has seen me through tougher spots than this, and it will again." The plan was risky, bordering on desperate, but it was their only hope. As night began to fall, Jed, Clem, Billy, and the remaining able-bodied hands prepared for their dangerous mission. The fate of Cache Creek and its precious herd rested on their ability to reclaim the life-giving water. The drought had tested them, but now the true confrontation with Silas Croft was at hand. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Jed and his small contingent moved like ghosts across the parched landscape. The air was still, heavy with the scent of dry earth and desperation. The distant, mournful cries of the thirsty cattle served as a constant, agonizing reminder of what was at stake. Jed, Clem, and Billy, along with 2 other ranch hands, moved stealthily towards the western approach of the spring. Their movements were silent, their senses heightened, every rustle of dry brush, every snapping twig, sending a jolt of adrenaline through them. They could hear the low murmur of voices from the direction of the spring, Croft's men, their campfires casting an eerie, flickering glow against the dark earth. Meanwhile, further north, Clem and another hand, Hank, were positioned to create their diversion. Their task was to draw the attention of Croft's men, to make them believe an assault was coming from that direction. Jed signaled to his men, "Stay low, follow my lead. We get to the spring, secure it, and then we let the water run." They crept forward, their boots making barely a whisper on the dry ground. The sound of the spring, a faint, almost imperceptible gurgle, grew louder as they approached. It was a sound that promised salvation, a sound they desperately needed to hear. As they neared the spring, Jed signaled for them to halt. They could see the cluster of Croft's men more clearly now, huddled around the small pool of water, their rifles leaning against nearby rocks. They were relaxed, confident in their blockade. Suddenly, a series of loud, sharp cracks echoed from the north, the sound of rifle fire followed by shouting. Clem and Hank had begun their diversion. "Now!" Jed hissed. He and his men surged forward, their rifles raised. The element of surprise was theirs. The first shots were aimed not to kill, but to incapacitate. Jed's bullet struck a lantern, shattering it and plunging a section of the area into darkness. Clem's diversion had worked perfectly, drawing the attention of most of Croft's men away from the western side. A few of Croft's men, caught off guard, scrambled for their weapons, but Jed and his team were already upon them. The struggle was brutal and swift. The desperation of their situation lent them a fierce resolve. Jed, his old Colt in hand, moved with a fluid, efficient grace that belied his years. He disarmed one man, then another, his movements precise and economical. Billy, his youthful energy unleashed, fought with a ferocity that surprised even Jed. He wrestled a rifle from a burly outlaw, his face a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Within minutes, the small group of guards at the spring were subdued or had fled into the darkness. Jed immediately moved to the spring itself. He found the small dam that Croft's men had built to restrict the flow. With the help of Clem and Billy, they worked quickly, tearing away the stones and debris. A surge of water, weak at first, then stronger, began to flow. It wasn't a torrent, but it was enough, a promise of life. "Get word to Ma Sterling," Jed shouted to one of the hands. "Tell her we've secured the spring. Start moving the cattle." Just as they heard the sounds of more approaching horses, Croft's main force, alerted by the commotion, Jed heard a familiar voice, sharp with anger, cut through the night. "You meddling fools! You think you can stop me?" Silas Croft himself, astride a powerful black stallion, rode into the dim light, flanked by a dozen of his men. His eyes, like chips of obsidian, were fixed on Jed. "You dare to defy me, Stone?" Croft sneered, his voice laced with venom. "You and your rusty toy. I'll see you all buried in this dust." Jed stood his ground, his Colt steady in his hand. The water, now flowing freely, trickled around his boots. This water belongs to Cache Creek, Croft, and we won't let you take it." The standoff was tense, the air thick with the smell of gun oil and defiance. Jed knew they were outnumbered, but they had the water, and they had the will to defend it. The true battle for Cache Creek was about to begin. The confrontation at the spring hung in the balance, a tableau of defiance against overwhelming odds. Silas Croft, astride his black stallion, radiated an aura of ruthless power. Jed, his Colt steady, stood as the embodiment of Cache Creek's desperate resolve. The meager flow of water trickled around their feet, a silent witness to the brewing storm. "You think a few tricks and a bit of water will stop me, old man?" Croft spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "I have men, rifles, and the law on my side, a law I write myself in these parts." Jed didn't flinch. "The law doesn't care about thirst, Croft. It doesn't care about families trying to survive." He glanced at Lily, who, against his earlier wishes, had followed the diversionary group and now stood near Ma Sterling, her face pale but resolute. "It doesn't care about stealing a man's legacy." Croft's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his cruel features. "Legacy? Your legacy is dust and defeat, old man. My legacy is power, and I will have this ranch." He gestured to his men. "Take them, take the water, and make sure this little uprising is the last one they ever dream of." Just as Croft's men began to advance, a sharp cry came from Lily. She had noticed something glinting near Croft's horse, a small, ornate locket identical to the one Jed had found. It had fallen from Croft's vest during the commotion. "That locket!" Lily exclaimed, pointing. It's the same!" Jed's head snapped towards the locket. He recognized it instantly, the same tarnished silver, the same intricate engraving. He'd found one just like it at the abandoned homestead weeks ago. He'd kept it, a quiet memento of a forgotten life. "What are you babbling about, girl?" Croft snarled, his hand instinctively going to his vest. "My grandmother," Lily said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "She told me stories of her father. He was a prospector, lost years ago. He carried a locket, just like that one. He was swindled out of his claim, his fortune stolen by a man named Silas Croft." A stunned silence fell over the assembled men. Croft's face contorted, his usual sneer replaced by a look of pure panic. The scarred leader, his eyes wide, stared at Croft, then at the locket. That's not possible," Croft stammered, his voice losing its bravado. "My father, he was a respected businessman." "Was he?" Jed's voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the locket he'd found. He opened it, revealing the faded daguerreotypes. "This belonged to a man named Thomas Hemlock. He died alone, his dreams shattered, his life stolen. He spoke of a partner, a man who betrayed him, a man named Silas Croft." The older Silas Croft's father's name was Silas Croft, Sr. The younger Silas Croft was named after him. The implication was clear. The man standing before them was not just a ruthless opportunist, he was the son of a thief, perpetuating his father's legacy of deceit. The atmosphere shifted. The loyalty of Croft's men, built on fear and promises of wealth, began to waver. They looked at their leader, not as a powerful enforcer, but as a man built on a foundation of stolen dreams and broken lives. The scarred leader stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Croft. "Is this true, Croft? Did your old man steal this land, this fortune from this man?" He pointed to the locket Jed held. Croft, trapped by the evidence, sputtered, It's a lie. These people are trying to trick you." But the seeds of doubt had been sown. The men began to murmur amongst themselves, their eyes shifting from Croft to Jed, to Lily, and to the damning evidence of the lockets. The water, now flowing more freely, seemed to wash away the illusion of Croft's power, exposing the rotten core beneath. Jed saw his chance. "Croft," he said, his voice firm, "you built your empire on lies. You preyed on the weak. But you cannot steal everything. You cannot steal hope. And you cannot steal justice." He held up his locket. "These lockets are proof of your father's betrayal and proof of your own greed. These men," he gestured to Croft's wavering henchmen, "deserve better than to follow a thief." The scarred leader looked at his fellow outlaws, then back at Croft, his face a mixture of anger and disgust. "I'm tired of chasing shadows, Croft. If this is how you operate, I'm done." He spat on the ground. "So are a lot of us." Slowly, one by one, Croft's men began to lower their rifles. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Silas Croft, the feared outlaw, was exposed, his empire of intimidation crumbling around him, not by force of arms, but by the quiet revelation of a long-buried truth. The exposure of Silas Croft's family history had shattered his authority. His men, disillusioned and unwilling to fight for a man built on stolen legacies, began to drift away. The scarred leader, whose name was Jedediah's old acquaintance Jake, was the first to make his intentions clear. "I'm done with this, Croft," Jake stated, his voice firm. "I ain't no thief. I came here for work, not to chase your daddy's ghost." He turned to the remaining men, his gaze resolute. "Anyone else want to follow a rat?" A ripple of dissent went through the remaining outlaws. They had come for money, for easy plunder, not to be part of a legacy of deceit. One by one, they began to dismount, their defiance melting away, replaced by a quiet resignation. Some simply walked away, disappearing into the night. Others, like Jake, approached Jed and Ma Sterling, offering their services in exchange for a clean slate and a fair wage. Silas Croft, stripped of his men and his power, stood alone, his face a mask of impotent rage and fear. He was no longer the fearsome outlaw, but a cornered animal, his arrogance replaced by a desperate, pathetic fury. "You think this is over?" Croft snarled, his voice trembling. "I'll come back. I'll burn this place to the ground." Jed stepped forward, his Colt still in his hand, though he made no move to aim it. "There's no need for that, Croft. You've lost everything. Your men, your reputation, your father's ill-gotten gains won't bring you peace. You're a fool if you think you can fight the land or the people who call it home." Ma Sterling, her voice calm but laced with an unyielding resolve, spoke. "You have caused enough trouble, Mr. Croft. You and your father before you. Leave Cache Creek and never return. If I ever hear of you or your kind harassing this ranch again, I will see that justice is served, and it won't be as lenient as it is tonight." Croft glared at them, his eyes burning with a hatred that could not be extinguished, but he knew he was beaten. He mounted his black stallion, a lone, defeated figure against the dawning sky, and rode away, his retreat a stark contrast to the defiant arrival. As Croft disappeared over the horizon, a collective sigh of relief swept through the assembled group. The immediate threat had passed. The water, once again flowing freely, was a symbol of their victory, a testament to their resilience. Lily rushed to her grandmother's side, embracing her tightly. "We did it, Ma. We saved the ranch." Ma Sterling held her granddaughter close, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We did, child. We did." She looked at Jed, a profound gratitude in her gaze. "Mr. Stone, you have proven to be more than we could have ever asked for. You not only saved our water, but you exposed the rot at the heart of Croft's operation. You have earned your place here not just as a hand, but as a protector of Cache Creek." Jake, the scarred leader, approached Jed. "You did good, Stone. Real good. I owe you an apology. And my men and I, we ain't bad folk, just fell in with the wrong crowd. If you need hands, honest ones, we're here." Jed looked at Jake, then at the other former outlaws, their faces etched with weariness and a newfound sincerity. He saw not just reformed criminals, but men who, like himself, were seeking a second chance. "We could use the help," Jed said, a rare smile gracing his lips. "Cache Creek has a lot of work to do, especially after this drought. And we'll need every hand we can get to bring it back to its full strength." The sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, a promise of a new beginning. The drought had tested them, Croft had threatened them, but Cache Creek had endured. And in the heart of that endurance, Jed Stone, the quiet cowboy with the rusty Colt, had found not just a place to work, but a home worth fighting for. The immediate threat of Silas Croft had receded, but the scars of the drought and the conflict remained etched across Cache Creek. The cattle, though now receiving water, were still gaunt, their ribs stark against their hides. The land itself was a parched testament to nature's fury, the pastures brittle and brown. Yet a new spirit had taken root, a sense of collective purpose, born from shared hardship and hard-won victory. Jed, no longer the outsider, found himself at the center of Cache Creek's rebuilding efforts. The former outlaws, led by Jake, worked alongside the original ranch hands, their earlier animosity replaced by a grudging camaraderie forged in the crucible of shared struggle. They followed Jed's quiet, practical leadership, his understanding of the land and its needs proving invaluable. His days were a steady rhythm of hard work, mending fences that had been neglected, tending to the ailing cattle, and working to conserve every drop of water from the slowly reviving spring. He taught the men how to better manage the precious resource, how to dig deeper wells, and how to prepare the land for the eventual rains. His rusty Colt remained holstered, a symbol of the quiet strength he embodied, rather than a tool of aggression. Lily, her spirit revitalized, worked tirelessly alongside Ma Sterling. They implemented new strategies for livestock management, explored options for drought-resistant crops, and began the daunting task of restoring the ranch's financial stability. Lily's inherent understanding of the land and her innate kindness made her a natural leader, earning the respect of everyone on Cache Creek, from Ma Sterling to the reformed outlaws. Her interactions with Jed were marked by a growing understanding and mutual respect, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had forged in the face of adversity. One afternoon, as Jed and Jake were inspecting a newly dug well, Jake spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You know, Stone, I never thought I'd be saying this, but this place, it's got something worth fighting for." He looked at Jed, a genuine respect in his eyes. "You brought that out in us. You showed us there's more than just taking what you can." Jed merely nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "We all have our pasts, Jake. What matters is what we do now, what we build." Ma Sterling, observing the progress, felt a sense of quiet pride. Cache Creek was not just surviving, it was healing. The drought had been a devastating trial, Silas Croft a venomous threat, but the ranch had weathered the storm. The core of its strength lay not just in its land, but in its people, their resilience and their willingness to trust and work together. The story of Silas Croft's downfall and the resilience of Cache Creek began to spread through the surrounding territories. It wasn't a tale of heroic shootouts, but of quiet courage, of resourcefulness, and of the enduring power of truth. The legend of the rusty Colt and the veteran cowboy who outsmarted a ruthless outlaw began to take on a life of its own, a testament to the fact that true strength often lies not in the loudest roar, but in the steadiest hand and the most determined heart. As the first hints of green began to appear in the scorched earth, Jed Stone knew that his journey at Cache Creek was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. The first signs of life began to emerge from the parched earth. A delicate green blush spread across the fields, a promise whispered on the wind. The spring, though still modest, flowed with a steadier stream, and the cattle, their ribs less pronounced, grazed on the nascent growth with a renewed vigor. Cache Creek was not yet at its full glory, but it was healing, breathing again. Jed stood on a rise overlooking the ranch, the vast expanse stretching out before him under a sky that finally held the promise of rain. His worn Colt was still holstered, a silent reminder of the battles fought, but his gaze was fixed on the future. He watched Lily, her golden hair catching the sunlight, directing the placement of new seed. Her laughter carried on the breeze. He saw Jake and his men, working alongside the original ranch hands, their shared labor a testament to the trust that had been painstakingly rebuilt. Ma Sterling, her silver hair a beacon against the deepening green, stood by the ranch house, her eyes surveying her domain with a quiet satisfaction. She had faced drought, deceit, and danger, and Cache Creek had not only survived, but it had thrived, its spirit strengthened by the trials. Jed felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had arrived at Cache Creek, a man running from his past, seeking only a temporary respite. Instead, he had found a purpose, a community, and a sense of belonging. He had proven that his weathered experience, his quiet resolve, and his seemingly outdated Colt were more than enough to face the challenges of the West. He had shown that true strength lay not in brute force or flashy gunplay, but in resilience, in integrity, and in the unwavering protection of what truly mattered. The legend of Jed Stone, the cowboy who stunned them all with his rusty Colt, had become more than just a story. It was a testament to the fact that even in the harshest of lands, hope could bloom, and that the most valuable treasures were not gold or land, but the bonds of trust and the courage to stand for what is right. As the first fat drops of rain began to fall, hitting the dry earth with a soft hiss, Jed felt a profound sense of contentment. The drought was finally breaking, and with it, the long, hard winter of Cache Creek's struggles. A new dawn was breaking, one filled with the promise of renewal, of growth, and of a future built on the enduring strength of a ranch that had faced its demons and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, as he watched the rain wash over the land, a symbol of the cleansing and the rebirth that had finally come to Cache Creek. His journey here had been unexpected, but it had led him home,